Breaking tonight, we just got the French equivalent of an all-points bulletin for two of the suspects from today's terror attack in Paris. This image shows the two suspects and names them. They both have the same last name. Two of them are brothers, though we cannot yet confirm those reports, although that's what the French authorities have been saying. We'll update you as we learn more. We're trying to get zoom in on their photos. The bigger we make them, the more blurry they get. We do know that the murdered editor of this magazine, along with Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Salman Rushdie, are all on Al-Qaeda's most wanted dead or alive list, which was published in 2013. Last year, I asked Ayaan Hirsi Ali on this show how she felt about the many vigorous defenses of Islam as a peaceful religion. Watch.
I think if you insult Jews in this country, if you insult Christians in this country, if you insult Mormons, I've watched the Book of Mormon, you will get people who will write to you about their outrage. But there's always this fear that if you insult Muslims, there's going to be some kind of violent repercussion.
Tonight we are joined by Brooke Goldstein, director of the Lawfare Project, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, and Ahmed Yunus, former executive director of the Muslim Public Affairs Council and now a professor at Chapman University. Panel, thank you all for being here. And let me start with you, Zuhdi, on that. There is a fear that you can't say certain things about Islam because someone may show up at your workplace and shoot you in the head. I mean, is the fear not well-founded?
Well, it certainly is, and this is the issue, is that we Muslims have to wake up to the fact that these groups, these radical Islamists, are trying to impose de facto blasphemy laws in the West. And that's what terrorism is about. It's asynchronous warfare to attack our freedoms, whether it's our militaries at Fort Hood, our parliaments and governments in Ottawa, or our journalists and media, courageous people that are trying to speak out and define. Even the New York Times today has a piece about the blasphemy we need. They talk about the fact that the speech that defines liberalism is that which provokes violence. If you can't tolerate that, then you really don't deserve a seat at the table of modernity. That's what we Muslims need to wake up to, the problem that really we're denying, and most of the West is facilitating the denial of.
Here, what we are told by French officials here on screen right, are the faces of terror. These are said to be the two brothers, the two older suspects in today's terrorist attack. And we'll put them on the board so the viewers can see them firsthand. Let me ask you about this, Ahmed, because there's no question that these cartoonists were provocateurs and went to a place that mainstream Muslims may find objectionable, certainly not worthy of murder. But that's freedom of speech. And the more they react like this to freedom of speech that they find offensive, should it be the response that the more publications, the more news organizations put those images front and center on their newspapers and their TV screens?
Well, what should be said at the outset is he who opposes freedom, whether it is freedom of expression or freedom of action, opposes God. And this is pursuant to the example of the Prophet Muhammad and pursuant to the writings of the Quran themselves. And so if there are Muslims who are offended, and they perhaps have a right to be offended, their offense and its pursuant action must be within accord of what is permitted for a Muslim, pursuant to the Quran and pursuant to the tradition of the Prophet.
These guys think it is. They think they were acting in the name of God, as evidenced by the fact that they were screaming Allahu Akbar as they did it.
Yes, and they are greatly misguided, and the vast majority of Muslims around the world need to do much of what Zuhdi is talking about. There is a need to reform the average Muslim's understanding of the Quran and their understanding of the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad and its import to modernity. The way that we solve that problem is by democratizing the right of interpretation, by increasing the literacy of the average citizen who happens to be a Muslim and is the primary target of terror, so that they can push back against these radicalized ideologies that oppose the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad.
Brooke, your take on it.
Look, what we saw today was a direct attack on our ability in the West to exercise our free speech that's critical of militant Islam or even of Islam. And that's because these terrorists understand that freedom of the press is the greatest weapon we have against tyranny. And they want us to fear for our lives when we engage in a dialogue, when we debate terrorism and when we debate its root causes, and in this particular case, theology, Islamism. And they know that if we speak freely about these issues, if we write cartoons, that satirize these issues, if we debate the root causes, we will be able to understand them and then defeat them. And that's exactly why terror-connected groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations here in the United States slander anyone who talks about these issues publicly as Islamophobic, and that's exactly why terror groups kill anyone that criticize militant Islam, because they want to stifle dialogue about these issues.
Allow me to speak to that. Any Muslim institution and any Muslim organization that does not support a freedom for all people to articulate their critique of Islam is an institution that is opposed to God. Because only in a free society...
The problem is there are a fair amount of those popping up, and we've seen way too many recently. Zuhdi, I'll give it to you.
Well, Ahmed, I have to tell you, it's fine to say this all in the wake of this horrific murders, but you have to remember the Islamist groups in France just a few years ago were suing this magazine for defaming the Quran, defaming Islam. They weren't violent, they weren't terrorists, but they were suing it, trying to enact blasphemy laws. So the groups speaking on behalf of our community when there's no terror incident happening are actually fueling the legitimacy of the fact that that speech should be blocked. They're not saying the things you happen to be saying today in the wake of an attack.
That's what happened to Mark Stein, too, our lead guest. He got sued for making his comments about Islam as well. Brooke, let me ask you. I asked Mitch McConnell.
Unless using the legal system is terrorism.
Brooke, I asked Mitch McConnell whether it matters that the president today. This is not to pin it on President Obama. It's about the way in which we talk about these attacks, the way in which we talk about the ideology. But I asked Mitch McConnell, does it matter that the president did not link this specifically to radical jihad, to radical Islam? And he said it does. Your view on it?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that the Obama administration, even though it's taken the opportunity now to make these grand statements about free speech, has, during the course of the administration, everything it can to stifle open dialogue about militant Islam, from sponsoring Human Rights Council resolutions that attempt to make it a crime in international law to criticize Islam, going to the UN and saying the future does not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam, sends the message to Islamist terrorists not only that we agree with them that it's not okay to exercise free speech when it's offensive to Muslims, but also sends the message that we don't have the backbone to defend the inalienable human right to free speech.
But let me ask you this, Brooke, because we talked about before we came to break, Bill Donahue, who was on with Neil Cavuto today, saying he's had about enough of people insulting the Prophet Muhammad. He's not a Muslim, but he's been outspoken about images of Jesus Christ that are misused and so on. And he doesn't say they deserved it, but he says we have to look at that behavior and condemn it and stop it as well.
Well, I would say that Benjamin Franklin once said that whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech. Free speech, including the right to criticize religion, the right to criticize government, is the cornerstone of liberal democracy. Without that right, no matter how offensive we are not truly free. And terrorists understand that, and that's exactly why they want to stifle open debate that's critical of Islam.
They're trying to
impose
their will.
Because they know that the vast majority of Muslims want freedom, and they are competing in a market in which a minority want what they want, and the only way that they can convince the vast majority of Muslims that want freedom to not acquire it is by telling them that Islam supports it. And that, in fact, is a fallacy.
Thank you all.